About a couple of months ago, I made a video on a sleeping sickness called encephalitis lethargica, a disease which attacks the brain of the victims and leaves them motionless. It emerged during the midst of World War I and disappeared a few years later. No cause for the disease has been identified, and no other recurrence of the epidemic has been reported since. Today, I cover a similar disease, one that appeared, caused tens of thousands of deaths before disappearing years later, the cause of which remains unknown to this very day. Here's the English sweating sickness. In 1485, a series of outbreaks took place that affected primarily England but also Europe later on, and it ended in 1551 when the disease vanished. The victims affected by this contagious disease will initially experience cold shivers, headaches, and dizziness before the sweating stage suddenly began. There was no apparent cause behind this sweating stage, and this would normally carry out through a 24-hour period before they either recovered or died. The mortality rate for this disease was between 30 and 50%. As mentioned before, the cause of the disease remains unknown. However, there have been suggestions that an unidentified species of hantavirus was responsible. There are certain symptoms of the sweating sickness that overlap with hantavirus pulmonary syndrome. Additionally, hantavirus infections normally affect middle-aged adults, and this was the demographic primarily affected by the sweating sickness. Some people have criticized this theory, suggesting that although the sweating sickness is primarily thought to spread between humans, hantavirus infections rarely spread like that. It has also been raised that hantaviruses do not randomly appear and disappear like the sweating sickness did. Since the first outbreak of the disease began right after the end of the Wars of the Roses, there have been speculations that the French mercenaries that Henry Tudor hired to gain the throne of England brought over the disease with them. However, there have been records of earlier outbreaks of the disease, but details on these are limited. Therefore, scientists and historians have acknowledged that there may be a connection between the mercenaries brought over and the disease, but no causation. Around 150 years after the sweating sickness disappeared, there was an infectious disease named the Picardy Sweat that began in the province of Picardy in northern France, but spread to other parts of Europe. The Picardy Sweat is often compared with the English sweating sickness, as some symptoms were similar across both diseases, and both their causes were unknown. However, there were some differences between the two, the primary one being those affected by the Picardy Sweat had a notable rash, something that those affected by the sweating sickness was not reported to have. Additionally, the Picardy Sweat was not as fatal as the English sweating sickness. There have been several attempts to determine the origins of the sweating sickness by carrying out various molecular biology methods, but the lack of DNA and RNA have made these efforts difficult. For now, the cause of this mysterious disease remains unknown. Thanks for watching, and leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and consider subscribing if you want to see more content like this in the future.